Thank you for making time on a weeknight to come and listen to me ramble. So my name's Danny. I currently am a storyboard supervisor on Adventure Time, Fiona and Cake. Before that, I basically, for the past about 8 years, have primarily been a board artist for various studios, but I started in revisions and I still do revisions as freelance occasionally. And yeah, I think that's like a very, very short version of my career up to this point. I don't know how in depth you want to go in terms of where I've worked or what I've done.
Can you go like where you worked and where you have done?
Sure thing. So I actually started about 8 years ago in 2014. Yeah, that's 8 years ago. I was at the college that I went to in my second year, California Institute of the Arts, also known as CalArts. And I had known going into college that I could only afford to go for 2 years just based on the tuition costs. And so I knew that I had like a timer at the end of those 2 years that I had to get a job or move back in with my parents and try and find a job somewhere else. So I was actually in like my final class sort of the fall semester, and I got a call from a producer at Cartoon Network offering me a job at We Bare Bears as a revisionist. I jumped at it, got out of there. I was in the middle of finishing an assignment and I just turned it in half finished because I knew it didn't matter anymore. And then I started the following Monday. Worked there for about a year. And then I started as a storyboard artist on a show called OKKO, Let's Be Heroes, also at Cartoon Network. Stayed there until the series ended in 2018. After that, 2019, I worked quite a few different places, just freelance here and there, and also shorter gigs. So I did some freelance for Craig of the Creek. I worked at Warner Brothers for a little bit on a Scooby-Doo direct-to-video movie. And then I went over to Netflix to work on a show called Battle Kitty that actually premiered this year, finally. And then later in 2019, the folks over at Amphibia at Disney TVA reached out to me to start boarding at the end of the second season. Went over there. And then that's mostly where I worked for the very beginning of the pandemic. So that was interesting. And then that production wrapped at the beginning of last year. And I stayed at Disney TVA. I was working in their shorts department. So if you've watched any of the theme song takeovers, or they have like random rings or any of the chibi shorts, obviously I haven't done all of those, but I was in that department. And I did get to do the Marcy theme song takeover for Amphibia, which I'm still very proud of. And a couple of other, small things involving Amphibia and Big City Greens and other stuff. And let's see. After that, I went over to Netflix to work on an untitled, but I believe it's announced that Alex Hirsch is making a show at Netflix, but it hasn't, I don't think any details have been released. So I was on that for a little bit. That ended up needing to go back into development. And so earlier this year, I left Netflix and I started back at Cartoon Network where I began, but now I'm a supervisor. So that kind of gets us up to date. I've freelanced here and there for a bunch of different stuff over the years, but yeah, that's like the broad strokes.
All right, members, do you want to ask any questions for our guests?
Let's see. Sorry, I might have a little difficulty keeping up with the chat, but I'll do my best. So let's see. I just want to ask how to find freelance storyboarding jobs in the US if I'm not from the US. So I will say for freelance in general, regardless of your location, in my anecdotal experience, so just what I've personally witnessed, it can be a little bit difficult to get freelance gigs if you haven't worked at a studio full time to begin with, or unless you know someone personally on one of the productions. Speaking now as someone who is sort of learning the ropes of supervising, the times where I am freelancing someone, it's because I need someone really like last minute. They need to come in and help me like stop the bleeding on something that is going very awry. So typically I need someone who has a little bit of experience, who I can reliably, give them an assignment and it's going to come back looking good. It can be a little bit tougher if you haven't had a full-time job yet, if you don't necessarily have that experience under your belt. I would say getting a freelance gig in general, though, you can get it, without having that first big job. But in general, it kind of follows the same principles as trying to get any other job, is just that, like, make sure you're posting new work, make sure that you are following up on any connections that you make. And make sure that you're telling people that you want freelance. I think that is something I've learned throughout my career, is that for all things, unless I tell someone that I want it, it's not necessarily going to just happen for me. You really have to be your own like salesperson / advocate / representative, when my job earlier this year in the spring ended, I was kind of hoping to maybe move up into supervising or directing. And from talking with a friend, I was like, I need to be telling people that, because right now I just look like I'm a board artist. I'm happy to keep doing boards, which I would have been. But if I wanted to make that jump, I needed to be the one to tell people that, so that they would actually put me up for consideration. So I would say if you're looking for freelance, do all of the normal stuff that you would to get any other job, but just also tell people that you're open to freelance, that you're actively looking for it. The good thing is, if you're working freelance, you don't necessarily need to worry about, a company sponsoring you for a visa. That depends, like if you're already here in the US on visa, there might be sort of limitations on where you can work. I know that if you're working full-time for an employer on some visas, you can't do freelance for another employer. But if you're outside of the US, we hire people all the time who are outside of the US or even outside of North America. So yeah, definitely just put yourself out there and be doing good work. The next question says, some industry folks I know have told me I should apply for revisionist positions rather than artist ones. Are there elements to a portfolio that make someone a better revisionist rather than an artist, i.e. clean lines, more poses? And thank you for the nice words. Revisions is kind of tough to show in a portfolio because it's an inherently additive process. So if anyone's unfamiliar about the specifics of what a revisionist does, it varies from production to production, but in general, you are taking the completed storyboards from the board artists and cleaning them up, hooking up certain elements for continuity, making sure that things are labeled properly. It's a very technical process, and so that can be kind of difficult to show in a portfolio. One of the revisionists that was on Adventure Time with me up until earlier this month, Sophie now, she made a really incredible version of like a storyboard revisionist portfolio where it was the board, rough side by side with the cleanup that she did. So if you have experience on a show, that's something you can do. If you're someone who you're trying to get your foot in the door, you don't necessarily have something that you can compare. What I look for in terms of a revisionist, definitely draftsmanship, being able to draw well and draw in a technically proficient sense. You don't have to be like, Glenn Keane or whatever, but like some amount of solid foundation in terms of anatomy, posing, shot composition is really helpful. And I can tell that through board samples. If you're doing your own personal board samples to put on your portfolio, I'm going to be able to tell, how you handle cleaning up a board because that's what you're going to put up. Some people have mixed opinions on whether or not they want to see rough boards. For me, maybe not putting that on your website, but maybe offering that to folks like, hey, here's the rough version of the board I did versus the cleanup I did. That could be a useful way to show people that you are able to sort of take that process. I think other things, just in general, like revisions is a very detail-oriented position. And so if I see errors in your resume or on your portfolio website, that's going to give me pause. And I know that seems kind of silly, like how are those correlated? But I've looked at people's portfolios where one of their tabs is like the stock, insert your image here thing. And like I said, this is a very detail-oriented position. And so even though those aren't like a one-to-one skill thing, and it might have just been a mistake you made, it shows to me that you're not double checking your work. And that's really, really important. I think in general, it's just, a revisionist portfolio sort of has to be sort of similar to a storyboard portfolio. And until you get that first gig where you can compare your work versus what you were given, it can be a little bit tough to make a revisionist specific portfolio. It's kind of difficult to envision what that would look like. The next question says, did you think art college was worth it? So I have very complicated feelings about my time at CalArts and about sort of private art colleges in general. I'm still paying off the student debt for one. And I make decent money. I have a union job. I have been able to save money and put aside for certain things, but I'm still paying down like a significant amount of student debt. So that's the biggest thing. My actual time at CalArts was, I don't know if it was necessarily the best education. I think there was a lot of inconsistency in terms of, whether or not you had like a good character design teacher was year to year, because the faculty doesn't always stick around because they aren't really getting paid well either. So it's expensive for them to actually come and teach, and drive out of their way to do that before the pandemic. So there was a lot of inconsistency in terms of what level of quality you were going to get out of that experience. It also bred a very competitive environment in ways that I don't think were educational. Actually working in the animation industry, the people who treat it as a competition rather than a collaborative process are not the people that I enjoy working with. I really genuinely enjoy that it takes a village to make an animated project, because I know that I have particular skills and I know that I have particular weaknesses. And it's really cool that I can just focus on the stuff I'm good at and not worry about the stuff I'm bad at. And it can still come together to make a really beautiful end product. So I think CalArts didn't really prepare me for what the actual industry was going to be like. For me, I think it's a little difficult to tell like whether or not I would have been able to get a job without going there. I think maybe eventually. I do think I genuinely have the skills and the work ethic, and I think I do a good job in the work that I am now in. But it definitely provides a lot of access to the industry geographically, like it's very close, but also just because it's, one of those big name schools and studios recognize it. And I don't think this is quite as true now as it used to be maybe a decade ago, but the CalArts name does hold weight. And unfortunately, sometimes when people are looking for people to hire, that's the only thing they're looking at. I do think with how many resources are on the internet and how many absolutely fantastic artists are, on the internet easily, easy to be found, basically. Like they're just everywhere. You like throw a cat, you hit like a really amazing artist who is just waiting for their opportunity. So I think it's becoming a little bit more of an even playing field. And I think other colleges are also, creating their own animation programs. But I think in general, there's just this issue across all private colleges, really, but art colleges where they really don't necessarily seem to put the students first, even though we're the ones paying to be there. I know that like the Savannah College of Art and Design, like SCAD, seems to just every year there seems to be a new thing that they're doing to like piss off their students, and I don't understand it. And yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I have a lot of complicated feelings about it. I don't think that I would change anything about how I, got to this point, but I don't necessarily recommend people go the route that I did. And I also don't think it's completely necessary, but I do want to acknowledge the difference of access that it provides you. Sorry, I know that's a big, dumb answer, but I just have a lot of feelings about this. Let's see. What's one piece of advice for those breaking in that you don't often hear being given? I also apologize if you can hear my musician neighbors now. I don't know if this is like not given often, but I think the thing that I hear the most as a mistake when I'm talking to people who are trying to break in is that they don't want to be a bother. So if you, let's say, get the information, like the contact information for a recruiter for a particular studio, and you reach out to them, you make that introduction, and they write you back, and they're positive and, welcoming. If you never follow up on that, you are kind of selling yourself short. You're kind of not taking advantage of what you really should be, which is an opportunity. And that's not to say, like, shouldn't be blowing up people's inboxes. If someone tells you they don't want to be contacted, leave it, but there are so many people I talk to where I tell them like, hey, reach out if you ever want a portfolio review or want to talk or get advice, and they don't. And that's okay. Maybe they ended up going a different direction or they got busy, personal life, whatever. That's totally fine. But if you're sitting there with an opportunity in front of you that you could be following up on and you're not because you're worried that you're going to be annoying, I think you're kind of, you're making a mistake. So I would say follow up with people, give them a reasonable amount of time, maybe a few weeks, month or so, but keep following up. The first job that I got on We Bear Bears, I took a test, the summer of 2014, and they did contact me back. We talked about maybe a position for me. It ended up not panning out. But the showrunner told me, hey, keep in contact with me because maybe if something opens up later, we'll be able to, hire you for that instead. And I did. I emailed that sucker once a month from August until December. And I ended up getting the job. And I think it's important to remember that when studios or productions are trying to hire people, they're excited about you being interested too. So as excited as you are, shows don't get made without artists. So remember that too, that you are providing something potentially that will be really valuable to them. Follow up, email people back. What does your day-to-day look like as a story artist? Do you mostly work remotely or is it majorly in-person / studio? So obviously right now, it's all work from home. This summer, we have sort of seen some studios trying to get folks back in the office, dependent on their position. When I started at Cartoon Network for this current job, they did give me the option of working either fully in-house, fully remote, or hybrid. I opted for hybrid. Now that the case numbers in LA have been going back up and also monkeypox, I am staying inside. They sent me a Mac to work on at home. I have my own Cintiq, so I'm perfectly happy to work from home. I do miss the air conditioning, but I'd rather be a little sweaty than have COVID. So it definitely does depend. And I think studios are kind of, in some cases, prematurely trying to bring people back in. And then as soon as case numbers go up, they have to send everyone back home again. So there's also a lot of studios that just have hired so many more people over the pandemic that they don't have the physical space to fit everyone back in. Like Cartoon Network, I think if they tried to bring back everyone who has a job with them right now, they wouldn't have enough seats for them or enough desks. In terms of what my day-to-day looks like, my day-to-day as a storyboard artist is very different from my day-to-day as a revisionist or as a storyboard supervisor. As a storyboard artist, my experience largely has been that, we have a handout meeting, I'm given the script, we talk about it a little bit, And then I essentially scurry off into the woods and am not seen again until like 4 or 5 weeks later. And then I hopefully have a storyboard to show them by then. But it's a very solitary process, at least in my experience. Basically, the only person I'm talking to is my board partner and the director. And I'm just like singularly focused on trying to get this board done. As a storyboard supervisor, a lot of my day involves responding to emails, responding to Slack messages, being in meetings. So I have to be way more connected. I'm like kind of glued to my desk. And my two main responsibilities are basically prepping assignments for the revisionists to work on that are working under me, and fielding revisions that are maybe requested on the fly from the art director, the line producer, the showrunner. So kind of multitasking a lot more. There's a lot more on my plate at once. But it's a very different sort of work. As a revisionist, my day-to-day, I haven't been a full-time revisionist in a long time, but it was very feast or famine. Like, it was either that we needed to clean up this entire incredibly rough section in like a few days and we were just grinding, or there was nothing to do. And so because I was working at Cartoon Network in Burbank, I would just walk down to the Burbank Town Center, which is the mall that's right across the street, and I would like buy shoes. I don't know. So these are all very different processes. And it also depends on the production and the studio that you're at. Oh, sorry if you can hear my cat as well. How would you describe your freelance life? As in, what is your freelance work and how do you manage? I guess I'm asking what a day in your life is like. So I think a similar question to the previous one, specifically in terms of freelance. Depends on what you're doing as freelance, but in my experience, I always say yes to freelance and then I regret it in the moment because it's really difficult to do it on top of a full-time job. But then once I get the money, I really like it. So that's sort of the roller coaster of emotions. It does involve much more personal time management. You know, no one is going to be checking in on me except me. So it involves a lot of personal responsibility. And if you're dealing with, I have and still deal with, but especially during the first year of the pandemic, I really struggled with procrastination that was stemming from anxiety. And so I would put off work and put off work and put off work and then do it all, what should have been like multiple weeks worth of work. I would do it in like a few days, which is not healthy, not good. But if I'm not careful, that's what my freelance life can look like. When I'm being good, I'm working on it a little bit here after work, or if I have a slow day at work, I'm working on it during the day, working weekends, stuff like that. So you give up your personal life for a little bit, typically, if you're taking on a freelance. But if your friends are also in the animation industry or any other type of industry where there's grind periods, they're pretty understanding. So I try not to take it on too often. How many boards should your portfolio have? And do you have any books you recommend? I don't know that there's like a hard number on how many samples you should have in your portfolio. If you want, I can go ahead and screen share what I have on my website. I think I have the ability to do that. Right now, I think I have 6 samples up. So I think anywhere from 3 to 6 is probably fine. Let's see. Cool. Can you all see that?
We can see it.
Cool. So you can see I've got mostly Amphibia right now. I do have a couple from OKKO. These are obviously not all of the samples that I have in my, hard drive. But I do try to rotate them out so that I have most recent stuff up, so it's the most accurate reflection of my work. And I use SlideShare to host them so that they're easily clickable through here. But if, someone needs to see it bigger, they can. I also have YouTube shorts. Like I said, this is from when I was working in the shorts department at Disney TBA. So I just put those up I have a couple of gifts from my time on OKKO that I think are particularly dynamic, that show maybe my ability to do action or slapstick comedy. I also do have a clip here from OKKO. So I think obviously this sort of stuff, is difficult to have unless you've worked on a production that has like finished products. But in terms of your boards, I would say at the very, very minimum, 2. Maybe like 2 is probably not great. 3 is better. And then I think anything over 6 gets a little unwieldy. I think even like how many I have here, I probably don't need 6. But I put them up because I like them. And I think that it's more important to me to maybe have 1 too many than to not accurately show the variety of what I can do. So you've got like a car chase. This is like a montage, like all sorts of stuff. So for me, that's important because I don't want to be pigeonholed into one particular type of work if I can. And then in terms of books that I recommend, oh no, I lost my place in the chat. I'm sorry. Okay. Books that I would recommend specifically for art. I'm that person that buys, books about storyboarding or books about cinematography, and then I never touch them, and that's bad. So I do have books that I have that I've heard are great. They're on my bookshelf, and I would love to recommend them to you if I had actually read through them. I will say there is a graphic novel called Uncomfortably Happily that I really, really love. And for me, it's kind of my ideal storytelling, I guess, like style of storytelling. So that would be the book I recommend, mainly because I just want everyone to read it. I don't think it will necessarily help you with like being a good storyboard artist, maybe, but I just think it's really important to, especially once you start working full-time, indulge in your interests, read books that excite you or watch movies that, are interesting to you. It can be really, really easy to get jaded about making creative content, and you can feel like you're kind of stuck in a very monotonous grind. And so I really try to, after work hours, like I am trying to watch and read what I can. I think movies and TV are a little easier for me. Books, I don't have the attention span for anymore. Let's see. Do you have any preferences / suggestions for what to look for in sites to present portfolios or red flags to avoid for the same? I don't know about anything that I have red flags for. I host my website on Weebly. I own the domain, but I pay, for Weebly because I don't know HTML, and I don't care to learn it. So I just want a really easy way to format everything and have it be hosted for me. I think more important than necessarily what specific service you use outside of, whatever works for your budget. And there are free versions of this, like even Tumblr still, like you can still host stuff on Tumblr and that works fine. More important than how you specifically do it is just that you have it at all. There are a lot of people who I can see, based on their Twitter profile, like, hey, they're looking for work. They want to start working in the industry, but the only place to look at their work is their media tab on social media. And that's not great because sometimes there are memes in there or GIFs, but also it's just not convenient. It sucks to have to click through stuff like that. And I would rather just be able to click a link that is really easily shareable to recruiters or people on my team. So just have a website, period. Everything else just based on what works for you in terms of cost, what your technical abilities are with, formatting a website. If there's 0 like me, then yeah, go for Tumblr or Weebly or Squarespace, or Wix. Let's see, sorry, just scrolling down. How do you deal with art block? First, I try not to guilt myself for it or shame myself for it. I think there's this very pervasive idea that if you're not being productive, if you're not always on and always making something, that you have failed as an artist or you've like failed as a person, because society teaches us that we have to do things in order to have value. So first, try and break that down. That might require therapy, so your mileage might vary. But kind of what I was saying before, just like letting myself indulge in a movie I've been wanting to check out, or a game. You know, I'm playing Majora's Mask because they have like the SNES, package on the Switch, and I'm like loving it. I actually, when I played it as a kid, I really just watched my older sibling play it because I was too afraid of the enemies in the game. So now I'm playing it, and there's parts that are familiar to me, but there's so much I just don't remember about that game, and it's amazing. And it's like very inspiring to me. So revisiting things that maybe you haven't seen in a while, haven't experienced. And honestly, the quickest way for me to get out of, like, let's say I'm having a specific block on what to do with like a shot in a storyboard. The quickest way for me to resolve that is to talk to somebody, whether it's my fiance, who's also a storyboard artist, or my board partner. To me, that's like a surefire way to get your brain sort of kickstarted, because either they're going to give you an idea that then sparks something in your head that, blossoms into something really cool that you get really excited about, or they're going to say something and you're going to be like, actually, I hate that idea. I want to do the opposite, and thank you for that. And that's also fine. I never take that personally. When I suggest something to my fiance, if he's immediately like, no, but what about this? Like, okay, whatever it takes to get there in the end. And I think that's a pretty common feeling among storyboard artists. So I think those would be the main things. But the most important thing is to not feel bad about it. Just do your best. And I think discipline and work ethic are a lot more reliable than inspiration. So I think trying to foster that within yourself as well. So done is better than perfect, I think, is the saying. What is the process for getting notes / feedback / edits for a storyboard? I've heard from some pros that if you receive too many notes in a row, you might lose your job. So it sort of depends. And honestly, it kind of depends person to person what the notes process is like. Directors and showrunners have very different processes. There are some shows where the notes process takes like a whole day, and it's really grueling, honestly. And there are some where, the showrunner says like one or two things and then you're good to go. Some people go over the entire board and redline any changes that they want. Some people just give them verbally. So it can really vary. Personally, like the notes that I am doing are drawing notes on top of the boards, or trying to put, any changes needed into a Google Sheet so that I can then give that to the revisionists that are working with me, and they can make any edits that they need to. In terms of receiving too many notes in a row, it's honestly pretty uncommon for people to be outright fired from a production. Not saying it doesn't happen, but it's pretty rare because the pipelines are very, very tight. So there's not a lot of room to look for a replacement. So that works to your advantage if you are a worker, is that you are very valuable. And so it's difficult to replace you. If somebody is having the same issue repeatedly, like they're making the same mistake over and over and over, maybe you'll get called in to sort of talk about it. If your supervisors are good supervisors, in my opinion, they'll talk to you and try and figure out like why this is happening. Maybe something's going on in your personal life. Maybe you're just having a difficulty understanding the notes, and so maybe they need to be presented to you in a different way. So I think it's pretty uncommon to be fired. People do, maybe sometimes have particular sticking issues that make it difficult for the production. But again, as long as your supervisors are doing their job correctly, it should be a process to improve with you, and you should be given a lot of opportunities before, the hammer comes down and you're booted from the production, because that's not fair. I think, let's see, I'm trying to think of this wasn't something that happened repeatedly, but one time I boarded the entirely wrong script for an episode of Amphibia. I boarded an old version, did the whole thing, 4 weeks or 2 weeks of work, pitched it, the whole thing. And then when I was finished, my showrunner said, "That was so good. Thank you. I don't know how to say this, but you boarded the wrong script." We ended up fixing it. I always, that day, after, I always think of that GIF from The Wind Rises where he's drawing and the papers are just flying. That was me for 24 hours. And crying. I think there was a lot of crying. But they didn't fire me. It is a mistake, especially, during the pandemic. Stuff like that, wires can be crossed really easily. It's so much tougher to truly explain something over text rather than just popping over to someone's office and explaining it with them there. So I think in general, people are pretty lenient, pretty understanding. And as long as you're making an effort to improve, I think people are willing to work with you. How many hours would a working day or week be? So I am a weekly employee, which based on the Animation Guild contract means I work 40 hours a week. Anything over that is considered overtime, is paid at time and a half. If I have to work the weekends, that's paid even more because it's then a 6th and 7th day. Sometimes if you're working freelance, you'll be classified, if it's, again, for a union studio, you might be classified as a daily hire, which means that they just have to assign you at least 4 hours of work for whatever day they call you into work. And I believe there might be a limit on how many hours per day, but there's a minimum you have to hit. And they can just assign you sort of day to day based on their needs. So that can be a little bit more all over the place. Typically for freelance revisions, I will either just bill a 40-hour work week or I will invoice the specific amount of hours that I had to put in. So a couple years ago, I was revising for Craig of the Creek, and there would be sometimes a week where I billed 30 something hours. And then there was another where I only had to do 5 hours worth of work. So it can vary for freelance. For a full-time position, you're typically looking at 40 hours. Some supervisors and directors are working on call, basically, which means that they don't get overtime, but they get paid every week as if they are going to be working, I believe, 56 or 60 hours a week. So that it can kind of vary on the position as well. What is the work environment like at Cartoon Network and Disney? So it's kind of tough because now that we're working from home, there's not really a work environment. My work environment is my home office, which is a little stuffy. There is cat hair everywhere. But also all of my favorite things are here. So that's kind of nice. I think Cartoon Network is kind of like the cool kids table in that it is sort of seen as the younger, more experimental studio by some people. It's a little bit more willing to, well, before Netflix came around, had its rise and then sort of dip. It was kind of like, yeah, the cool studio. And then I think Netflix came and took that mantle for a little bit. But now Cartoon Network is kind of, because of the Warner Discovery merger, there's sort of an identity crisis happening with Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers. So it's a little tough to pin down. Disney has a very particular type of culture that is mainly stemming from the fact that it's Disney. And so Cartoon Network is like its own thing. And obviously it's owned by other bigger corporations. But Disney is like a monolith and it owns so much stuff. So like during my orientation, they had us all go around and say what our favorite Disney property was. And someone said The Simpsons. And that really like kind of sent a shiver down my spine because that's like a product, that's like a property that they ate and now is a part of their body, but that's not what I would consider like a Disney property, but it is. So I think at Disney, you either meet people who are like there for life. They've worked for Disney since they first started working. They'll be there till they retire. They have, they go to Disneyland every weekend. They buy the merch at the stores, everything. Then you have people who are working there kind of in spite of hating Disney and, make fun of it a lot. I think I fall somewhere in the middle, maybe leaning towards hater. I really enjoyed my time there. I really enjoy the people there, but Disney itself as a corporation is kind of odd and a little daunting to work within. The title of the book was Uncomfortably Happily. Let's see. Just scrolling to the next question. Do you mean mid-level or senior level story artists are better for the freelance job? Usually after how many years a junior level story artist can be a mid-level or senior level story artist? I don't know that there's necessarily levels. I don't think it's quite as regimented as that. What I meant earlier with freelance is depending on what the freelance gig is, you might need someone who is like a pinch hitter, which means that I'm not going to have to guide them very much. I'm not going to have to teach them along the way. And so I am just like literally assigning them stuff with instructions on what to do, but nothing more than that. And they're turning in back to me something that I can use and immediately put into the pipeline. With someone who maybe has less experience, that's not really a fair position to put them in, to kind of throw them in the deep end and expect them to turn in, perfect quality work. So I think for folks who are less experienced, who are trying to learn, a full-time environment is more conducive to that. That's not to say that, entry-level beginner story artists can't do freelance. It's just that in my particular perspective right now, if I'm looking for a freelance revisionist, it's because I need help immediately and I need to know that I'm not going to have to fix things once it comes back to me. What are the requirements for starters, both freelance and industry? I might need a little bit of clarification on what you mean by this question. If you want to I'll come back to it towards the bottom of the chat. What is a showrunner? So a showrunner is the term for the person on a TV show who either created the property. So you'll see sometimes the credits are, Amphibia created by Matt Brawley or The Owl House created by Dana Terrace. So those are both showrunners for those particular shows. And they sort of straddle the line between the creative management and more of the technical business side of management. So, they're handing out stuff to the artists and the production workers and things like that for them to complete art assignments, but they're also talking with programming and the executives at the studio and helping to manage the budget. Those responsibilities definitely vary based on the studio and the production. That's typically the idea, is that they're sort of the head honcho. And like I said, they either created the property or they are the person that's been tasked with sort of helming the project. So I think that's I think that answers the question. Do you have any advice to students who are planning on going to art school? Advocate for yourself. Ask your teachers questions, and make sure that your specific needs are being met. You're paying to be there. So if there's something that a teacher is not providing in their class that you think would be helpful or that they should be providing, I would encourage talking to them. If they're not receptive, talking to whoever is in charge of the department. You may not be successful. It may, fall on unwilling ears, but I think looking back, I wish I had done a little bit more of that and just spoken up a bit more about what I thought could be improved. And if you're taking out student loans to go to art school, get in and get out. Honestly, like the debt is no joke. And it's really, really wild that we let 18-year-olds and 17-year-olds sign for something so life-changing and massive at such a young age. So if you're getting a free ride there, or if someone's paying for you to go there, then, have the time of your life. But if you're going there on future use dime, then make the most of your time there. Do you agree with the notion that the only people who don't break in are the ones who give up? I personally like the sentiment, but have some issues with the seeming reality. I don't think that's true. I think the industry has some very real and palpable barriers in place in terms of who has ease of access. So summer of 2020, obviously, all of the protests and the uprising that were happening in the US, we had a lot of studios who were suddenly making these commitments and promises to hire more Black artists and to make the studio environment safer for them and more inclusive, etc. In all honesty, a lot of that has not come to fruition, and it is difficult for artists of more marginalized, underrepresented groups to gain access, because a lot of this industry is based on, like I was saying earlier, like if I want to hire a freelancer, I need to know that they can do the job. And in order to do that, I need to know them, which means that they are more likely to be similar to me. They are more likely to be a cisgender white person. And so it's my responsibility to try to consciously counteract that. But there is not necessarily an industry-wide desire to do that, or there are some people who don't think it's necessary. So I don't think that statement is necessarily true, that the only people that don't break in are the ones that give up. There are a lot of people that I have personally witnessed who spend years trying to get that first break. And once they do, if they do great, and they never have trouble getting a job again, which shows that they were able to do the work. They were qualified. The problem is no one ever gave them that chance. How long did it take you to break in? So kind of to that point, like I was saying earlier, I attended a year and a half of CalArts. I started working when I was 19. So I basically went straight from high school to college to a job. So I didn't take very long to break in at all. And I think it's important to be transparent about that, because I don't want to play up like, oh, it was so difficult to get in and this. Like, I think I got extremely lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I think, obviously my work still had to be good. Once I was given that opportunity, I had to be able to show up and prove that I was worth it. But I got the opportunity in the first place. And there are some people who don't get that. So I think these kind of tie in together. But yeah, didn't take me very long. And so something that I'm really passionate about within the Animation Guild, the union for LA-based animation work, and Titmouse New York, is testing. So if you've never done a test for an animation studio, it's a very, very common, to the point of being basically mandatory, method of vetting applicants for a job. So for a storyboard artist, for example, what they might do is say, hey, we're going to give you about a page of script or a prompt for an outline. We want you to board this many panels, and you're doing it for free. You're doing it on your own dime, on your own time. And many studios never even respond to you after you submit it. If they do respond to you, don't always get a job. So you may have just sunk however many hours of free work into a job that is not actually going to come to you. So for the past 5 years, I think 4 years maybe, that is something I've really tried to make a difference on, because, you know, I didn't have to go through that experience, but I know so many people, like a friend of mine took 20 unpaid tests before they got their first break. And that's not acceptable. Like, I knew their work the whole time, and I was already working in the industry, and I knew they were qualified, and I was recommending them left and right for stuff, but it just took someone to actually look at them and their work and see that they were ready and to give them that chance. And I don't want to see other people have to essentially bang their head against the wall for years when they were ready from the get-go. What is a storyboarding tip you wish you knew when you first started? I think when I first started, trying to think of what the best way to put this is. Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to earlier. Done is better than perfect. If you are a first-time board artist and you're scared out of your pants, that's very normal. It's very daunting. It's a lot of responsibility, and it's difficult work. But there were so many times where I wish I had just pushed through, completed something, and then you can build on that, you can edit it, you can improve it, and you'll do that with the help of other people, the showrunners, the directors, other board artists on the show. But if you don't finish it, like, well, now you're just late for a deadline and you have to ask for an extension, and then you get anxious about that. And I caught myself in that cycle so many times. So I think, honestly, just like time management and abandoning perfectionism would be what I would recommend to younger me. Let's see. Advice for people who are starting to build a portfolio/reel and a network. Like I said earlier, have a website. A Twitter and Instagram is not enough. You need to have a place that I can go see your work in its entirety, and that has your email on it, your resume if you have one. There are so many people who don't have their email readily available. I skip those people. Even if their work is great, I'm not going to go hunt down how to contact you. So have some way to contact you. I'm not a huge fan of, on some people's websites, they'll have a contact form. So it will be one of those where, like, I fill in the information and it submits an email to them. I think I understand where some people are coming from that in terms of a privacy angle. Like, if you're someone, say, who has dealt with harassment or a stalker, totally get why maybe you don't want to have an email on your website readily available. But the thing with that form is I don't get a copy of that email. So you essentially, if it's not in my email inbox, it doesn't exist. So if I email you and you happen to not see it, I'm not going to be able to follow up because I'm not going to remember. So it just is not quite as reliable as just like straight up emailing someone. If you need to make like a work inquiry only email account that you can ditch if you need to, if you know it causes a problem, like, do that. You don't have to use your personal email or your school email or whatever it is. Like, I have separate emails for like 3 different things. I have like a personal email, I have a work email, I have a union email, and I have like an email that I only use when I need to sign up for spammy stuff. In terms of building your portfolio, in general, like actually making the pieces, definitely have variety. Don't put in work that you don't want to do. So I was giving a portfolio review to someone one time where they had really beautiful samples for their style was sort of similar to like Satoshi Kon, like Cowboy Bebop sort of anime, but like very anatomically correct and sort of more leaning on the realism side, but like with style. And they were asking me for tips on how to make sort of the stuff that I do, like the cartoony, more kid-friendly, I guess, content for kids programming. And I asked them if that was what they were interested in doing, and they said no, but that people recommended they have a variety in their portfolio. which is true. But if you don't want to do a particular type of work, you shouldn't put it in your portfolio, because someone is going to contact you if they like it and say, hey, we want you to do this for us. And if you're willing, if you just want a job, period, okay, sure. But if you are looking for, like, you specifically want to work at Cartoon Network, or you specifically want to work at Sony, build your portfolio towards that. If you have that specific of a goal, you should be building pieces that reflect that. And you can still do variety within that bubble. So not every show at Cartoon Network is the same. So the pieces can sort of reflect that. Not every episode of a show from episode to episode is the same tonally or content-wise. So you can still fit in a lot of diversity in your pieces without putting in something that you're not actually passionate about. That's another thing. If you weren't interested in the piece that you were making while you were making it, okay, it's going to show in the work. And I think the people whose work I truly enjoy the most and that catch me the most are the people who are, again, indulging in their interests. That shines through, and that is so appealing. It's like a magnet. Like, people just love that. People love specificity. They love seeing someone who is very clearly doing something that appealed to them, and, you know, they just happen to put it online. In terms of building a network, again, follow up with people. If you make a connection with someone, do not drop it unless they tell you to. You know, be respectful, be polite. Make sure you're not contacting them frequently, like blasting their email inbox, but like, talk to them and take them up on things that they offer. If they tell you, hey, you want to get coffee and talk about the industry, let me know. Take them up on that, even if it's over Zoom, whatever. If they are offering that, they probably mean it. There are a lot of us who really, really want to pass on whatever knowledge we currently have to the people that are coming in, because it makes them, honestly, more fun to work with. Like, if you guys are coming into the industry already sort of knowing some of the ins and outs, that benefits us as well. Let's see. I'm making an animation club in my university, since a lot of my classmates in my major want more training than what our underfunded generalist digital art major offers. But I'm not really close to being knowledgeable or highly trained as an animator. So what would be good starting points to try to inform other students about animation and its pipeline? So this is kind of tough. It's a big question, but I'll have to grab the link for it and put it in the chat. But Marie Lum is an artist in the industry who put together a huge Google sheet of different resources for learning different parts of the pipeline of animation. And she has also marked them, whether they're free or if they do have a cost, what that cost is. So I would say, like, browsing through that and taking what might be useful, that is a great first step. I think, honestly, just, it sucks that you're in this position where you essentially have to band together to teach yourselves, because the school that should be training you is not really. But I think more than necessarily actual knowledge, like, you know, from a professional or from an industry source, if you are meeting frequently enough with this group and you are completing projects together, or if you're completing projects solo, but you're all doing it sort of together in a collective, I think that's going to up your skills so much already that I don't necessarily know that you need to worry about the specifics of how things are done in the industry. Glean what you can online and from talks like this, but what will improve your skills the most is just drawing all the time and completing projects and learning from them, and then implementing what you've learned in the next project, and just getting feedback from your peers, because those peers are also probably who you're going to be working with once you all do break into the industry. Is it easier to get into the industry or to do freelance/commissions, or is it relative? Like I said, I think it's very relative to what the need of the particular project is. So it's sort of, I don't know that there's necessarily a binary, you know, this is easier than that. It is dependent on the project and it's dependent on you. What do you see in portfolios that shows that one person is ready and able to do the job and the other is not? I don't know that I can boil it down to one particular, sort of signifier. To me, I can generally tell within, clicking through maybe a few panels of someone's like board samples, how close or far away they are to being ready. But it's very much just like a case by case feeling. There are some portfolio reviews where I'm looking at their stuff and I'm like, you don't need a review from me. What you need to be doing is emailing recruiters. You're good. Like, don't worry about it. You're going to be my boss in like 5 days. And then there are some people where, their draftsmanship isn't quite up to par, or there are some people where I've met with them multiple times, and the ones that are implementing feedback, I'm like, okay, you're on your game. If you're not there yet, you're going to be soon, because I can see that you're making progress. The people who aren't necessarily doing that, maybe they have stuff going on, personal life stuff, but it does mean that to me, they might not quite be there. So it's very tough to tell. I don't think there's like a binary, you're ready, you're not. That is like reliably consistent. It really just depends on whose work I'm looking at and what they're lacking in particularly. If someone's not necessarily a great draftsman, but their sense of humor, their sense of shot composition, staging, they might be ready for a boarding gig, but not a revisionist gig, because those are very different skill sets. Let's see. Okay, I think I've reached the end of the chat questions as far as I know. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has any other questions, or if there's anything I can share. I have, I've got rough thumbs from episodes of Amphibia versus like final boards. I'm happy to sort of share whatever might be useful to the group. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I can share that. I probably have stuff from OKKO I can share. I don't know if I have rough thumbs. Let's see. I'm just going to pull up my, I believe I have the thumbs for the season 2 finale of Amphibia. I can find the correct file. Sorry, I'm going deep in the hard drive now. Also, feel free, I can't really look at the chat right now. I don't know how you all usually conduct these talks, but if anyone wants to get on mic and ask a question, I'm happy to do that. I've been listening to just myself talk for like an hour, and it's making me feel weird.
Some questions we got are by Michael. Were you ever at a point where you were unsure of a position you want to be in the creative industry?
Dude, I feel like that constantly. I honestly felt more sure of my... it says Zoom settings won't let us unmute ourselves. Okay. I think at the beginning of my time in the industry, I actually felt more sure about what I wanted to, what my career goals were than I do now. And it's not because I'm unhappy now or I feel lost now. I think I really just like working in animation, and I've now gotten sort of a variety of experiences that I don't feel like I'm, missing out by not I wanted to be a board artist so bad when I was a revisionist. And I felt so like, I want to move up. And once I got there, I was like, oh, this is really hard. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. Sorry, it's just taking me a second to share the correct screen. And now I'm kind of just like, sure, like whatever, if the project sounds cool, if I think I would do a good job at whatever it is that they're offering me, great. Beyond that, like I don't really have any ambitions to become a showrunner or the director of a film or anything like that. Maybe one day I will. Maybe that will change. But right now, it's not really something I'm personally interested in. I really like the day-to-day sort of making of a project, and being a showrunner seems really stressful. So these are my actual like paper thumbs. I have them somewhere in my filing cabinet. These are scanned. These are my thumbs for the very beginning of the season 2 of Amphibia finale, True Colors. So these are all like maybe 2 inches wide on a piece of printer paper, just done in pen with Post-its over stuff that I needed to redo or white out. And the idea here is to just get everything out, just get the beats and shots sort of worked out on paper, roughly how I envision them in my head. And once I have that, it's so much easier for me to go in and board things and improve on what's here. So do the best version of this, and not have to, it's almost like, like straight ahead animation. That's really tough to do with boards, and you will paint yourself into a corner repeatedly. So things like screen direction are really important in TV animation. And this sort of helps me circumvent any wonky, like, the characters were on this side, but now they suddenly pop over here. Having it laid out like this, really rough, really tiny, but clear, lets me view all of that at a glance and kind of almost like seeing the forest for the trees. And I also write notes on the side for stuff that I'm like, I don't want to draw this out, in a thumb. It's not going to matter. I'm going to have to pose it out anyway in the board. So I'll just like write stuff down. Like in this part, like Sasha strolls up the steps first, but this is the shot she ends in. So I just need to draw her jumping up the steps. And then tracking, these characters throughout. So again, I don't feel like drawing them in this tiny little space. But I know that when I get to the rough stage or the cleanup stage, those characters are going to need to be there. I'm going to need to keep track of them. And then you see like stuff I've crossed out or scribbled out. And, I think here, literally like in this panel, I just wrote evil because it's like a mural of revealing that the king, sorry, and spoilers for Amphibia, but, the king of Utopia of Amphibia is a bad guy. So I just wrote evil. But yeah, so that's the absolute like super, super rough thumbs. That's what I try to bang out like the first day after I've been handed out a script. I don't always do this for every single board, but I always regret it when I don't. And I find the next steps really difficult if I don't do that. So I highly recommend it. And then I can show you the roughs for that. So you can kind of see what those manifest into. And this is what gets pitched on Amphibia. It was to the showrunner, the writers for the particular episode, and our director for that episode, and the other board artists. So this is what gets pitched. The little thumbs, they don't get pitched. I remember some of my coworkers marveling at me drawing something on paper, so they were kind of asking about it, but like it's not an official like pitch material. So here, let's see. So you can kind of see how these translate from those really, really rough thumbs. There's no background here, but the character action is a little bit clearer. there's a little bit of tone to indicate certain things. There's more posing out of like stepping out this camera move and showing her like reading over it. That wouldn't be in the paper your thumb stage for me. And I have been told that my roughs are relatively clean. To me, I try to keep things really sparse. I'd rather add on to something than have to take away. For me, that's just personally more difficult. So I try to keep it to stick figures if I can. Depends on the show and what they're looking for. But I think part of that also comes from me starting as a revisionist. For me, I think my strengths as an artist are efficiency and clarity. And so I just try to play to that. So you can see here, like lighting, cool, something like this, I'll take a little bit more time on to make look right because it's sort of like a money shot. Like it is cool and sells this really like important story beat. But everything else is like, just get it on paper. Don't worry about how it looks necessarily. And so this is, more of my section, but you sort of get the idea. Like it's stick figures and dot eyes and, not fully fleshed out posing. A lot of cut gags, unfortunately. And then I can show you very briefly what the clean version looks like. I hope this is helpful. I don't know if this is just like looking at a bunch of scribbles. So this is the clean board. This is after the 2 weeks of roughs. I pitch the board. The showrunner, director, whoever else gives me notes to address. And then I go off to address those notes and to clean up the board to the best of my ability in the next 2 weeks that I had. Because on Amphibia, we had 4 weeks for a board. Some studios have 5, 6. Other studios have like 8. It's really dependent on what the budget is for the show and what the priorities are for the project. 4 weeks is kind of tight, but thankfully on Amphibia, the scripts were so well thought out and clear that personally it didn't bother me too much. It definitely got tough during the pandemic, but that was more just due to burnout from the pandemic and like a year of sustained trauma. So you can see here, I've cleaned up this background. Some stuff, if it was already pretty clean in the rough, I just left it because I just didn't have time. But like here, added another background and cleaned up Marcy. Kept this shot the same. This shot is mostly the same, but one of the notes was that Matt wanted to put in Bill Cipher and Goliath from Gargoyles, which I spent a lot of time on that Gargoyles drawing to make him look like the Vitruvian. Here, pretty much the same. So you can see like some stuff was clean enough that I really didn't need to worry about it. And I knew that it was in a state where if it needed to be cleaned up, it could be easily cleaned up by, well, not easily necessarily, but it could go to revisions or conform and be handled. Some stuff needs to be cleaned up because otherwise it's just not clear. So here, change the background a little bit to reflect some requests from Matt. Added this shot. That was a note to show the power lines, sort of a atmosphere thing. A lot of it is adding backgrounds, honestly, which is really, really helpful in TV animation for design. They really have to rely on the boards to set the stage for them. And then they make really beautiful background designs, but they need those bones. So this is all, cleaned up, and now they don't have dot eyes. They have actual expressions. So you can kind of see the general idea. And then, so this goes off to revisions, conform, goes to be, built into an animatic. But this can still, and did change a lot. There was so much that had to be cut or changed for this episode, which happens for every episode, but a finale especially just can get really unwieldy really fast. So lots of this stuff ended up being changed, which is totally fine. And sometimes those changes are handled by the revisionist. Sometimes they're handled by the director. I don't think we had a storyboard supervisor on Amphibia, but like on Fiona and Cake, sometimes I'm doing those, small board changes after the fact. Yeah, so that is that. I will go through the chat to see what's significant about 839. 839 is also, I think someone might be unmuted. So the union that I belong to, that Animation Guild, it's called the Animation Guild, but it's also known as IATSE Local 839. So we're part of the larger union, the IATSE, which is the International Alliance of Theatrical and Stage Employees. So it covers editors, it covers the folks that work on movie sets. So we are a part of that. I try to put it, anytime I have an opportunity to put a 3-digit number in, I'm putting in 839 because I like it. It was in Space Jam, like the meeting hall that they go to when they're trying to figure out, like the original Space Jam, when they're trying to figure out how to beat the aliens and like what to do. The meeting hall is called like Guild Hall 839 or something like that. So if you look for it, you might find it in other animated stuff. I'm going to try and scroll back up. How to improve on draftsmanship. What do you look up to create boards? Draftsmanship, honestly, I think comes just from practice, just a lot of practice and learning shorthands for things like anatomy or, angles of shots, stuff like that. So just drawing a lot will, I think, get you there eventually. Studying anatomy, doing figure drawing, doing life drawing, studying, how to draw animals. I do try to force myself to learn how to draw environments at least a little bit, because even though I'm not a background designer, obviously you saw like I have to sort of have a rough idea of how to draw a building or a castle or whatever. So trying to do that if you can. So in general, just looking at reference, like if you're not sure how something looks in real life and you're trying to imitate real life, look for a picture of it or a video or take a picture of yourself. I have a lot of photos of myself on my computer of me doing very stupid things and poses because it was for a storyboard shot. I have photos where like, there was one time where I was trying to figure out an over the shoulder sort of down shot and I just couldn't figure out how to get these elements to fit in the scene together. So what I did is I asked my fiance to sort of pose in the correct way. And then I took one of my anime figures and put it in the foreground and like took a picture of it and angled it just the way that I needed it to for it to work. And then I just like referenced that for the shot. So one of the storyboard artists on OKKO, Dave Allegre, when he was trying to figure out action scenes, like, 2 characters fighting, he would use action figures or like, again, anime figures that he had in his office, and he would try to figure those out. So look at real life. I'm not a huge proponent of like, everything has to be super realistic all the time. It has to match real life exactly. That's not really what I want out of animation, personally. But I think there's a difference between realism and believability. So something can look super cartoony, but if it's informed in the way that it's moving or acting by real life, it can add a very interesting sort of element. Do you think working in animated movies is better or television? Again, I don't think there's a binary, this is better, this is worse. It really depends on what you're interested in. The feature process for boarding, so my fiance primarily works in feature, which is kind of nice. I think we're sort of 2 sides of the same coin in that way. He has to do scenes over and over sometimes, like, he'll finish a sequence, it will get notes, he'll have to completely redraw it, and that can just happen like dozens of times. And I hate that. I hate having to look at my own stuff for too long. So for me, I think TV is preferable. I haven't worked at a feature studio yet. Maybe one day. I'm open to it. I think it would be an interesting challenge and experience, but I've also been very happy in TV. There used to be sort of a dichotomy in the industry where TV was sort of looked down upon and feature was sort of where the true artists were, whatever. I think that idea is mostly dying out, partially because people sort of go back and forth all the time now. That's way more common. So there's no real point in trying to have a pecking order or be condescending about it. And I think there's also just a recognition that like we're all just artists who like animation, and there's no need to be snooty about it one way or the other. TV's not better, movie's not better. It's just up to what you personally want to do. Are there any cinematography books you recommend? No, like I said earlier, I don't read, and I should, and I'm sorry. As someone who's doing boards for a friend, thumbnails sound like something I should start doing. Probably, yes. Let's see. Yes, the showrunner for Amphibia is Matt Brawley, who is one of my favorite people and one of the best people I've ever worked for. What's something someone can practice every day to get better at revisions or storyboarding? Is it something that requires a defined practice, or is it better to just go with your gut? I think it's good to, before you dive into sort of studies or learning exercises, like figure out what you're actually weak at. Don't just do a study because you're doing a study. And I think like there can be a trend to like do a study of a movie, like to do the shot by shot in order to post that study on social media, which I don't really understand. Not to say that you can't post your studies online, but first and foremost, you should be thinking about what you actually want to get out of that practice and what it will do for your art form. So if you're someone that struggles with drawing hands, you should be practicing drawing hands. And you should be practicing drawing them in different ways and different poses. If you just draw like the same pose of a hand that you know how to do, but you just pass it off as studying. I've done that before. Not for hands specifically, but when I was like 16, I was like, yeah, this is doing something. I'm doing something. I wasn't. Just be like, have intent and be purposeful about what it is you're trying to improve. And then actually evaluate it after the fact. Like look at it and, something I did like a year or two ago is I watched through Spider-Verse because I watched through Spider-Verse and also had the original script side by side. And I tried to mark out where things had changed or how certain ideas had been expanded upon. Because if you read through that script, there's lots of stuff that is on the screen in that movie that was not in the script. So it was either added by a storyboard artist or an animator or someone doing like effects or music, whatever it is. I think identifying those differences, at least from script to board or script to movie, can really help you as a board artist. Because that's going to be your job, is translating a script into a moving image. What is the tool I use to make my boards? I work in a program called Storyboard Pro. Currently for work, I think I'm using like version 20. But I think on my personal computer, I have like 5.5 or something. It's a really, really expensive program. I bought it a few years ago because Netflix had like a 50% off discount for employees, and it was still super expensive. So I think if you're just trying to get that first break into the industry, period, or if you're just practicing, like, don't necessarily worry about the software yet. Use whatever is affordable and accessible to you. And then, maybe if you feel like you're about to get that first gig, maybe open like a trial of Storyboard Pro just to get yourself a little familiar. But don't necessarily worry about knowing the ins and outs of Storyboard Pro before you've even entered the industry. On some shows, you might be required to use Blender, which is like a 3D sort of CG program. The show I was on at Netflix earlier this year did have us using Blender assets, but I wasn't modeling anything. It was just for reference. So I just needed to know how to move around in the program, nothing else. How can you practice storyboards? So if you don't have a story idea yourself, then I think looking at like an excerpt from a book or like a classic story, like a fairy tale or something like that, gives you at least enough to sort of dip your toe in the water and get something out there. But I think the danger of using other property for your portfolio pieces is, I've seen portfolios where everything is iterative. So everything is based off of an existing franchise. And to me, that's a little bit of a red flag, even if the boards are really good, because it shows me that like, it's totally fine to do fan art. I love fan art. I think fan art is a very transformative process and you bring a lot of yourself into it. So it's not that it doesn't show your voice, but to a certain extent, I need to see what you do totally alone, just your own ideas, your own brain, because that's going to give me an idea of what type of work you want to make. And that is important in figuring out, you know, whether or not I want to hire you. What is the difference between storyboard revisionists and supervisors? I'm basically I'm like mommy revisionist. Like I'm the head revisionist, basically. Like I'm doing revisions, but I'm also assigning stuff to the revisionists. I'm checking in with them to see, you know, like when they're going to turn in their work, if they're having any issues, if they have any questions. So, you know, I'm technically their boss, but I try to be very collaborative and very transparent with them about, you know, why we're doing certain things. I try to really get feedback from them because you can be in charge of someone or, you know, be their boss without being a dick about it. What is the process of working with a co-storyboarder like on OKKO, and were there any particular differences with different teams? Your board partner on a project can be a lot like almost like dating-ish, or is it kind of like that? Well, I mean, you can, but I don't date my board partners. That seems messy. But it is very much like people either click together or they don't. People communicate differently. So my board partners on OKKO were Stevie Borbola first, and then we had sort of a team switch up. So Stevie started boarding with Ryan. And then it was Parker Simmons, and then finally Iggy Craig. And each of them was very different, and I'm sure I was different for each of them as well. I think each had, you know, like just different styles of boarding and different styles of communicating. And so, I don't know, it's just different. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just everyone is a little bit different. I do remember like boarding with Iggy was nice because sometimes I would just be working on something and I'd be like, I need like a really detailed shot of Professor Venomous's like pointy teeth. And I would just look up at Iggy and I'd be like, hey, can you do this for me? Because you're going to do it better. I could do it and it would be fine. It's going to be the best version of it if you do it. And that's kind of cool. Like, I think in storyboarding, you can almost like cast certain things as if they're roles. So some people are really good at comedy or drama or action sequences, car chases, whatever. And so sometimes, you know, stuff will be assigned to you based on that. On OKKO, the board partners would decide together how we wanted to split up the episode. And so we would do that of like, ooh, I'm really interested in this section and they're interested in that. Or like, we would try to make sure that we were alternating who got the action sequence every episode, because typically every episode there was a really intense action sequence. And if you have to keep doing those back to back, you're going to get burnt out. So it would be like, okay, well, I'm going to do it for this episode, and then next episode you'll do it, and so on and so forth. My board partner on Amphibia was Eddie West, and then Ferocia, and then Eddie again for the finale, like the season 3 finale, which was kind of cool. And those were both like positive experiences for different reasons. Ferocia was my pandemic board partner, and that's for life, ride or die. Eddie is genuinely like one of the most delightful people I've ever worked with. He's super funny, very weird. And I felt like we sort of gelled together, and it was nice that we had very different interests in terms of what we wanted to do, because it never felt like we were fighting over the same piece of a script. Okay, that was another question about Storyboard Pro, which I think you talked about a bit. If they want you to redo something, you get paid for the first and the redos. So if I'm a full-time weekly employee, then yeah, someone can ask me to do, at least in this position, they can ask me to do a revision on a board. As a board artist, that's not something you really get asked to do because you're already working on the next episode. That will be typically handed to a revisionist or a director or someone like me, the storyboard supervisor. So that's not really something that happens. I do know that a lot of folks who are working freelance will write into their contract, like, you get 2 rounds of revisions or notes. So I'm going to turn in a board to you. You get to give me notes for 1 session. I address them. And then 1 more session, I address them. And then that's it. I haven't had to do that because typically the freelance I've done, they've just told me like, hey, you're going to be doing this many weeks of work. And then after that, it's over. But I do know that some people build that into their own into their own contracts. I know it's really common with illustration to make sure that you have it in your contract that you will be paid for, edits and revisions. Oh, there's so many messages. Have you ever worked with an international team on a project, like from France or Japan? What's their production flow like to watch? I have not personally, well, I did get to meet, there's a studio that works with Disney TVA that I did get to meet once. Is it Liquid Animation? They're in Australia, I believe. So I did get to meet with them. They were lovely. It was really cool to talk to them, and I was always, singing their praises. I think in general in TV animation, the production that is done in the US is very separated from the production that is done either overseas or in Canada, Australia. So in TV animation, a lot of stuff is sent to studios in South Korea that are just fully, studios full of animators. So their job is to just animate the boards that we send them and the designs and stuff. So that's studios like Sayrom, RDK, Rough Draft, Studio Mer, Emation. And I think the separation is purposeful because I think it kind of benefits studios to not have us talking together too much. Animators overseas are severely underpaid and overworked. They do not have unions like I do here in the US. And so I think studios kind of benefit from that separation because when employees start talking together, they start comparing notes and they start maybe building for change. So I think there's a lot of history behind this. There's a lot of history of why certain elements of the animation pipeline have been outsourced to other countries. And it comes down to studios and corporations trying to make their budgets as small as possible. And it doesn't benefit, us as workers on either side of the ocean. So I would love to be able to know them more and actually talk with them. But language barrier aside, there's an actual barrier. And really the only people who talk directly with them are the showrunner, the line producer, the people who are, giving assignments to them and getting them back from them. So as I, have become a supervisor, I'm a little bit closer to that. I have been in meetings with the animators, but it's still not like a I'm not able to talk to them in the way that I'm able to talk to my coworkers here in the States, which is really unfortunate. And I hope that, change can sort of be made on that front. I believe Nadine said it was just going to be one more question. I'm not sure when that message was posted. I'm not sure how long this talk is supposed to go.
You can answer that last question about the internships, and I think we'll be done from there.
Okay, sorry. I'm
No,
not
you're
meaning
good.
to keep you. Any tips for trying to get internships at studios? So I think first thing is look closely at the internship's requirements. Some of them require you to either be a current student at a, secondary education, like a college, university, whatever. Some of them let you attend up to like a year after graduating. So first of all, make sure you actually know what the requirements are of whatever internship you're looking at. And then a good thing to know is that a lot of internships, you won't necessarily be drawing. A lot of them are like production internships. So you will be shadowing folks like the production coordinators, the production assistants. Obviously, you're still talking to and learning from everyone on the show, but you won't necessarily be drawing. And part of that is because at least at union studios, those are covered jobs. And so interns are not supposed to be doing those jobs. If they are, they should be, union employees. In 2018, a side letter was added to the union contract that does allow for internships that are art-based, but there's very specific guidelines around how those are utilized. For you, if you're trying to apply to an internship, I think just following their requirements to a T is really important. I will say, like, a lot of this is just me speaking anecdotally. I did not do an internship. I've not applied for an internship, but the folks I know that have done it, just follow their instructions, keep applying for as long as you're able. If you don't get in, you can do multiple internships. So if you intern at DreamWorks and then you intern at Cartoon Network, like that's the more the merrier. It's all good. My advice, once you do have an internship, talk to the people that are on the show. The interns that I remember and was able to talk to and like help and like, if they hit me up now, I'd be like, oh, hey, yeah, I remember you. Those are the people that actually like talked with people and asked questions. And, it's like what we were talking about before. I totally understand people don't want to be a bother. They don't want to be annoying, but you're there to learn. And as long as you're being respectful, no one's going to hold it against you that you're curious. And honestly, people love to talk about themselves. I've been talking for like 2 hours just about me. We love it. So if you come up to someone and ask, hey, what's your job like? They're probably going to talk your ear off, especially if they feel like they're undervalued. They're going to complain to you for like an hour. Okay. So once you do get an internship, like make the most of it. And I think just the general note I have for folks who are trying to break in is there's a difference between networking for the sake of, trying to have like cool friends in the industry. I see that a little bit where it's like, you're almost like collecting people like Pokemon of like, oh, well, I know this showrunner and I know this director and I know this and that and blah. There's a difference between that and talking to people and being transparent about what your goals are and what your wants are. So if you were just talking to someone, if someone comes up to me and says, hey, I really want to get a job in the industry, would you look at my portfolio? Happy to. Love that. That's so straightforward and it's very honest and it lets me know exactly where they're coming from. If someone messages me and is like, what's your favorite color? Not only are they wasting my time, so now I'm annoyed, I'm also like, I can see what you're trying to do. It's very transparent. Don't do that. But there's a wide gulf between those two things. So just talk to people. Be nice. I hope that sort of answers the question.